Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz, speaking to you from the pulpit of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia. At this time, I'd like to speak to you on the subject of God's political agenda, a government of laws, not men. God's political agenda, a government of laws, not men. What's worse than a nightmare? A recurring nightmare. As an American and as a Jew, I am the proud supporter of two democracies, the United States of America and the State of Israel. The nightmare of January 6, 2021 in the United States is threatening to repeat itself in Israel. Granted, that's a pretty dramatic beginning to what I want to say to you at this time. If you have listened to my weekly messages, you know that I do not typically indulge in high decibel rhetoric. But I mean this seriously. The run-up to January 6, 2021, and the outrage of January 6th, that was a national nightmare for us as Americans. We didn't know how bad things would get, but we could see the conditions for disaster growing more dangerous. In a plague year in which voting by mail was recommended by doctors and scientists as a life-saving public health measure, we had a political leader who openly cast doubt on the urgings of doctors and scientists, thus turning absentee voting into a partisan wedge issue that it never needed to be. Prior to the election, he tried to suppress absentee voting by maneuverings at the U.S. Postal Service. After the election, he cast doubts on the legitimacy of the election results, as he had often promised he would do at political rallies. And his specific argument was an attack on the legitimacy of absentee ballots. This strategy played on the anti-intellectualism and the authoritarian tendencies of part of our American populace. Between November and January, the atmosphere grew ever more toxic. Ultimately, the unwillingness to concede an electoral defeat very nearly subverted the crown jewel of American democracy, which is the peaceful transition of governmental power. It is now nearly half a year later, but we have not recovered from the failed putsch of January 6th because our country has failed to reach a consensus about honestly labeling even that kind of attempted coup for what it was. While the details do not all match up, the tensions in Israel today are too close to our American precedent for comfort. There are differences, of course. No one there is challenging the legitimacy of the ballot counting. Nor is there a straightforward choice between two opposing political parties, because Israeli democracy is on the British, not on the American system. And many parties can flourish in that model. But the similarity is what counts. As in America, in Israel there is an incumbent who would rather characterize the electoral decision as illegitimate than concede defeat. Moreover, as in America, the Israeli incumbent, outgoing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is credibly suspected of fomenting violence in an attempt to hold on to the reins of power. For the American listener who is not fully conversant with Israeli politics, you should know this. To form a government, there must be a party or a coalition of parties who hold a majority of seats in the Knesset, which is the name for Israel's parliament. In the 3/4 of a century since the country's birth in 1948, no one party has ever won a majority of seats. So it is always a matter of assembling a coalition. For the past several years, through repeated elections, the incumbent, Netanyahu, has been unable to form such a coalition, but neither has his opposition. And so he has remained as head of state in a caretaker status. Essential business of the state cannot be concluded under this unsatisfactory situation. But in the current election, leaders of 8 different political parties have assembled a majority, presented their government to the Knesset for its ratification, and received democratic approval to move forward. It is the most improbable coalition in Israel's history. It includes right-wing, centrist, and left-wing political parties, Orthodox Jews, and secularists, and even, for the first time in Israel's history, an Israeli Arab Islamist party. What unites this mishmash of rivals? Those on the political right have worked in the past with Netanyahu, but no longer, because they are repelled by his authoritarian and probably illegal methods. He has been indicted on multiple counts, and his trial awaits only the conclusion of his term in office, which is probably why he's fought so hard to stay in office. Those not on the political right think that he has stoked division and discord within Israeli society and wounded it from within. Of course, he has his passionate supporters who believe, as did the passionate American supporters of our former president, that he alone is the bulwark against the demise of Israeli society. But those supporters could not achieve a victory either at the ballot box or in the post-ballot negotiations. So now, in another chilling parallel to the American run-up to January 6th, there has been a crescendo of threats and incitement. Lawmakers signaling their willingness to go along with the incoming government have been personally threatened, and their children have been intimidated. Nor does that seem to be a spontaneous upwelling of popular anger. The campaign of incitement has the earmarks of having been orchestrated by Netanyahu's supporters and endorsed by him. Netanyahu's statement to his supporters, quote, "Don't be afraid to lay into them," meaning their political opponents, has the same valence as Donald Trump's exhortation to fight like hell that led directly to the chaos and carnage of January 6th. In an unprecedented development, the head of Israel's internal security organization, Nadav Argaman, has warned against the likely outcome of the current climate of incitement. Quote, "This discourse may be interpreted among certain groups or individuals as one that allows violent and illegal activity and could even lead to harm to individuals." And let us remember that a similar campaign of incitement in 1995 led to the assassination of an Israeli prime minister, Yitzhak Rabin. This kind of public exhortation has never been done. Argaman gave a public warning rather than the more customary private briefing to political parties because of the sense of grave and imminent danger. There's a biblical connection here, and it so happens that the connection is to a part of the Bible that will be read in synagogues this coming Sabbath. In one of Netanyahu's meetings to rally his base, an ultra-Orthodox group, he likened himself to Moses, and his rival, also an Orthodox Jew, although not ultra-Orthodox, the politician Naftali Bennett, to the Bible's arch-rebel Korach. Netanyahu asked his supporters rhetorically, "And how did God take care of Moses' opposition?" He then reportedly answered by quoting Numbers chapter 16, "And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up and their households." I'm not a political scientist. I'm a rabbi. Speaking from my own biblical understanding, I feel safe in replying that the Bible should be taken seriously when it closes the book on Moses with its evaluation by saying that never again did any leader arise like unto him. Sorry, Bibi, that includes you. You are not Moses, and therefore your democratically elected successor is not Korach. It would be presumptuous to claim from our limited human perspective that God would vote either Republican or Democratic, or Likud or Meretz in the Israeli context. But it is not presumptuous to recognize the main message of the Bible regarding political association. It is meant to be governed by good laws, not by the unbridled ego of one authoritarian leader. That's why the Ten Commandments begin with the assertion that God is to be understood as the power that freed us from slavery, freed us from the authority of Pharaoh of Egypt. Whatever else may be unclear, this much is clear. God's political agenda is that we organize our political lives under governments of laws, and that even the heads of those governments must be under and not over the law. May our nightmares evaporate in the clear light of tomorrow. May our fears dissolve, and may the rule of good law prevail. Amen.